Good evening. Let me quickly start with some thanks. I am very excited to be here. I guess we can consider it's my first official event as a member of the department, even though I'm technically joining in 2 weeks, but I think we can consider it's a preponing of this. So thank you to the entire department, and particularly Florian and Ernst and President Shipman. And thank you to Susanna and Jorge who made this happen. There are many reasons for us to be here, but one of them is that I think it's a very important time in the world to rebalance academic excellence. It is possible that collectively we have put too many eggs in one specific basket, and I'm very excited to contribute as much as I can to create a more multipolar world. And that means Zurich, but that also means other places in the world where there is academic excellence that can be built. Starting with Brazil, where we had a very nice launch tour in March, and other countries in the world where there are actually a lot of talents that today do not really find a way to get adequately trained or the resources to get to do good research. And one of the things I'm hoping to do from here is actually contribute to that as well, I think, to the benefits of everyone. What I want to talk about today is, in some sense, very deeply related to my first encounter with Ernst, which was a fairness talk that he gave at MIT when he was visiting MIT regularly. Since I'm French and my English accent is not great and was even worse, I thought it was very funny that someone called Fehr is working on fairness. And I thought maybe that's but that's not the only thing I remember. And I think you will see why it's pretty really at the bottom of what we are trying to do in this project. So this is joint work with Abhijit Banerjee, my husband, partner in crime for many things, and Michael Grinstone from the University of Chicago. Let me start by a somewhat, I'll start with somewhat maybe depressing facts, and then go from there to, I think, what I hope is going to be a much more hopeful vision of how we can move on from these depressing facts. So the first, of course, depressing facts we all know from the IPCC is that the possible future looks hot, like a little bit no matter what. This is the famous stripes graph where you see the temperature in 1750 and then across as we move over the century, and in the future, the redder it is, the hotter it is. And pretty much no matter what we do now, it's going to be already significantly hotter than it has been historically. At best, we would have an improvement. At best, we would have an increase in the Earth's temperature on average of between 1 and 2 degrees centigrade. And at worst, it could, of course, be significantly worse than that, although that outcome is probably not as likely, unfortunately. But the possible future look hot. They look hot even if we decide now to really make a real effort in reducing emission. And unfortunately, we don't seem to be making a real effort to reduce emission collectively. These are projections of world emission. Of course, these are projections. It could change with change in technology or policy choices that lead to different technology adoption. But in general, you can see, even the most optimistic scenario lead to basically a continuous increase in emission till the middle of the century, and then a kind of a plateauing after that, and maybe some increase towards the end. And I'll show you where the increase comes in a minute. So this is kind of very stubbornly high projected CO2 emission. And of course, if we wanted to really reduce the warming of the planet, we would need to have an emission decline. The third fact I want to emphasize, which is probably less evident sitting in Switzerland, especially since it's particularly hot today, is that this is actually not really this is going to be a problem for the whole world, but particularly acute in countries where most of the poor people in the world live. Why? Well, because part of it is they are just really not lucky, but it's the fact that most poor people in the world live in regions of the world that are already hot today. And as the temperature of the planet warms, let's say by 4 degrees, it's not going to be quite uniform. The poles will warm up a little faster, but it's near uniform. But if you're starting from an area in the world where it's already about, you have already many hot days, then as the temperature warms up, you're going to get more of these hotter days. And the impact of temperature on the human body, or in fact on many things, is not linear. If you go from, winter in Switzerland when it's 10 degrees, let's say, and it's warmer by 2 degrees and it's 12, like it's nice. If you go in June and your normal temperature is 25 and it's 27, it's a little less nice. If you live in Pakistan and the normal temperature is 32 and now it becomes 34, it's not nice at all. In particular, it brings you in the zone where temperature will make you sick and might even kill you. And the poor countries have many more of those, will have many more of those days. In addition, you can combine that with the fact that money is helpful to adapt to warm temperatures. For example, if you have more money, you can pay for air conditioning. If you have more money, you are more likely to be working in an office. So if it's very hot in Texas, you go from your air-conditioned home to your air-conditioned office in your air-conditioned car, and the temperature is not really affecting you directly. If it's very hot in Lahore, you will likely not have air conditioning at home. It's even hotter under a hot tin roof than outside. You will then have a job outside, maybe in construction, so you will get hot the whole day. People experience temperatures which are constantly high with no night respite. So income, so the first problem of people who live in poor countries is they'll get more hot days. That's just, the geography of it. And the second problem is that they will be less equipped to deal with this hot day because money is protective and they have less of it. If you combine these two things, which is something that the Climate Impact Lab, which Michael is one of the co-leaders of, and you're looking at, let's look at climate projections and take a postcard from 2100. How many extra people are likely to die due to the hot temperature in every possible region in the world? And what you're getting is this map, which the first time I saw a version of this map, I decided I have to shift a lot of my work, which is in general on the life of poor people, to think about the life of poor people in a hotter planet, because this is like going to eradicate a lot of the effort that many countries have done in improving their health system and so on, because you can see that all of the poor countries is where you're seeing this increase in mortality by the end of the century if we continued at this rhythm. Whereas in richer country, you see the map to be blue, and a blue map means that it's going to reduce mortality. So you might be wondering why, and the reason is that the winter will be milder. And cold winter kill a lot of older people. So there'll be less cold winter, and the summer will be a bit hotter, but not hot enough to create extra deaths. So we have this really fundamental inequality, which is just because you happen to be poor and in the wrong place in the earth, you are likely to really suffer in your body and in your life from climate change more than pretty much anybody else. So this is the first fact. One of the ways to see it in another way is by ranking all of the people by income per capita. And you see the bar going above the zero line is the extra death per capita. So you could get an increase of about 10 to 20 deaths per 100,000 people in the poorest decile. To give you an example, this is how many deaths from cancer. This is the mortality rate from cancer. Whereas in the richer people, you get a decrease in death due to the milder winter. So this is this fundamental inequality that I want you to to keep in mind. What does it mean in terms of what does it mean in terms of what the world is doing to these poor people? What we can do is to say, well, 1 ton of carbon that is emitted by the rich world, or that is emitted by the world, I'll show you in a minute that it's mostly emitted by the rich world, is going to stay in the atmosphere for a period of time. You can see it from the first graph. 1 ton of carbon is emitted. Then it stays in the atmosphere for a very, very long time. It first absorbed by the ocean, and it comes back. As it stays in the atmosphere, it contributes to temperature change, again, for a very, very long time. We stop at 300 years, but in fact, it continues. And every year, because this 1 ton of carbon contributes to increase the temperature by a little bit, and therefore increase the number of hot days that are killing people, it kills some people. What we are doing in the last graph is to put a value on how much people, on the value of this lives cut short. It's, of course, a very dangerous exercise to put a value on life cut short. So I didn't take a guess. I'm taking the number that the OECD uses for a value of a statistical life, which is €1 million euro. What does this mean? It doesn't mean that if someone really is about to die, their value of the life at this point is, of course, infinite. But it means, for example, that it's the value we should use when we're thinking of building a bridge or building a new entrance to a highway that is going to cost some amount of money but save some amount of lives. So this is a value that we keep using all the time. And what I want to do is to use this value and say, this is exactly the damage that OECD emission or rich countries emission are imposing to the poor world year after year after year. So the damage is this, the number of people who are going to die today, next year, the following year, the following year, the following year. So the present and future deaths valued at the statistical life are caused by this 1 ton of carbon. So that gives you this very simple formula here, which is we have the mortality partial cost of carbon multiplied by any number. We could take world emission of OECD emission, gives you, in a way, what we would owe to poor countries if we took our responsibility of current current action seriously. So here are some number of what this means. In low and middle income countries, this cost of each ton of carbon through the death that it causes cost about $141 in terms of loss of life, multiplied by 14.4 billion a ton of carbon. Those are the OECD emission in 2023. This gives you a total damage to LMIC countries of 1.8 trillion a year. So this is our damage to the world, and including 1 trillion to Africa. If you don't like my numbers, I have others, because a lot of these actually are based on choices, they're assumptions. I think it's Groucho Marx. If you don't like my principles, I have others. So it's, if you don't like my numbers, I have others. We actually have a website where you can play. You can give a lower value of a statistical life or a higher one. You can say, no, I'm very patient, or I'm very impatient, and then you get your, you can calculate your numbers. Give you, what does this mean in terms of the damage we are imposing to poor countries? In India, it means that it's $326 per person and per year is the damage imposed to Indian people by OECD emission. Pakistan is, I can't see my graph, is $1,400. And you can see some African country, like the Sudan, is almost 2,500 euro, $2,500 every year is just the value of life short. So that's my third point. That was a big one, but it's very important. Emissions kill a lot of people in a very unequal way. And if we wanted to put a number to it, this would be a large number. The first fact is that although poor people are the ones who are immediately suffering from this, the climate change, they contribute almost nothing to it. Of course, historically, it has been true. Historically, the emissions have been mainly due to today who are rich today, for example, the US and OECD Europe. It's still true today when we are looking at per capita emission that the US has the largest per capita emission, followed by Middle East and Russia, where there is a lot of oil, China, OECD Europe, which is doing better and better, and then India and Africa in terms of per capita emission are much below. It's even truer when you do not consider just the emissions that are produced in a country, but the emissions that are due to the total consumption of someone, which we call sometimes the total carbon footprint. So imagine driving a car. If you're driving an electric car, your emission in this way that I first showed, the typical territorial emission, the way they are represented are 0, because there is no oil involved. But of course, there is electricity that has to be produced, so we should add that up. And then there is a lot of emission that were created that car. The car was built in China, so they are attributed to China. But in reality, since I am driving it here in Switzerland, it should be attributed to Switzerland. So people use trade table to kind of reconstruct full carbon emission. And then you can combine them with data on inequality to look at, to rank the entire world in terms of how much they contribute to emission as a function of their income. And what you get, this is work by Lucas Chancel and Thomas Piketty, what you get is that the top 1% wealthiest people contribute about 17% of total emission. The bottom 50% contribute just 10%. So roughly, the bottom 50% of people contribute 10% of global emission, and the top 10% contribute 50% of global emission. This inequality, by the way, is not anymore just inequality across country. It's also true within country that you have extraordinarily wealthy Indian people, for example, who emit a lot. So the inequality is more and more within country and not just across countries. The fifth point, though, is that even though in the past and even today, low-income countries and certainly low-income people contribute relatively little to climate change, they hold the key to the future of climate change. Why is that? It's because the OECD actually is making a lot of progress in reducing its emission. And meanwhile, poor countries are becoming richer, which is nice. They're also becoming more populated. And therefore, starting today, the emission of poor countries outside the OECD are going to keep increasing while the emission of richer countries are going to decline. So in the business as usual scenario, which is predicted by this group called the Rhodium Group, the OECD will start contributing less and less of the emissions that are responsible to climate change. And in particular, one thing that you can keep in mind is that if the OECD managed to be carbon neutral, the poor countries would still need to reduce their own emission by 85% relative to business as usual trend if we wanted to keep the planet at a 2 degrees warming. So this is an enormous number, and this is something that climate negotiators have tended to ignore. And I'm sure not everyone knows, because we tend to think of the climate change conversation as being one between rich countries that need to convince themselves to do something, and in the rich countries, perhaps I include China. But in reality, the story is not a story of rich countries anymore. It's not even a story of China anymore. You can see that the projection for China are a really rapid decline in emission. But we see large increase in Africa, for example, and India, no decrease in India. So it is really essential to bring poor countries in this climate conversation in a way that is more satisfying than what has been done today if we want to solve this problem. This is what I was referring to today, which is this rich country emission, this poor countries' emission. They are coming in part of the fact that some people in poor countries becoming richer and richer and therefore are contributing a lot to the emission. So that's how you can hold these two facts together. On the one hand, the poor people are really contributing nothing. On the other hand, there are more and more very rich people who contribute a lot to the emission. So this was the sort of diagnostic part. Now I want to move to a more kind of forward-looking policy prescription part, which is what we are hoping to put ahead. So when you get these two facts, that the poor people are the ones who are suffering the most, and the poor countries are the ones that we really need to change in terms of their trajectory of emission if we want to make progress on these issues, the only solution, really, to the problem of climate change is to put back vulnerable people and vulnerable countries at the heart of the climate effort. And this is pretty different from what has been done today in climate conversation. They were sort of a biased story, a little bit ignored in different COP conversation. At the Copenhagen summit, they were proposed some amount of money, which took a long time in coming, was mostly in the form of loans and not in the form of grants. So LMIC countries are really upset. One consequence of that, which was pretty obvious in the COP 30, which was in Belém, which I attended, is that they were just not very interested in negotiating at all. And in a way, the Belém COP conference could have been one of action because the US wasn't there. So it's unfortunate that the US wasn't there, but it also created an opening to kind of move towards more ambitious climate goals. And this is certainly what the European Union and Switzerland came to Belém with, that hope. And Brazil, very much as the host, hoped to be part of that. But so one of the things they were hoping to do is to have a roadmap of exit from fossil fuel. But the Brazilian hosts were collecting people who would be interested in voting for or against such a roadmap. And you can see here the lists that convinced them that the roadmap has no chance. And they decided not to put it forward. And you can see it is full of poor countries. You have India, China, Indonesia, Pakistan, Nigeria, DRC. You are countries whose people are the most affected by climate change, refuse to sign this roadmap. The reason is not necessarily that they think that it's not important. In fact, in many cases, they think it's important, but they think this negotiation have done nothing for them, and the past promises have not really been fulfilled. So there is a huge degree of upsetness in LMIC. High-income countries are also unhappy. They do not want to cut their own emission more. We see that it's become even more difficult. And they are extremely reluctant to provide climate finance. And given the budget situation of many European countries, that's probably not going to improve in the future. So what do we do now? Like, how do we try to find a solution out of this roadblock? Our proposal is to replace the existing negotiation in a way, or substitute or supplement the existing negotiation with a bargain. Let's make a deal. What would the deal be? It starts from that evaluation of the damages caused every year by OECD emission, which gives you at least like a scientific number that people can argue about, but you can understand where it comes from, of what are the emissions of rich countries, what are the damages that are imposed on poor countries. Wealthy countries would agree to compensate the low and middle income country for the damage that they cause with their emission. And in exchange, the LMIC country that participate would institute carbon pricing or other form of carbon control, for example, carbon trading. The nice thing is that we don't need to have a treaty that everybody agrees on. It can be signed by a group of countries, by a club of countries. Brazil at the COP started a climate coalition, which includes both rich and poor countries. This climate coalition could take it on within themselves, or you could make smaller coalition, and then people could aggregate. So it doesn't need the unanimity that the COP has. And the other thing is that there is something for everyone. There is something for the wealthy country which has the reduction, which want reduction of emission because most populations really want to control climate change. There is something for poor countries because they get money to help their people fight the consequence of climate change. So what would the OECD country do? They would basically apply the polluter pay principle, use the formula I showed you in the first part, and determine how much each of them owe to the fund in a particular year. What would LMIC country do? They would, first of all, agree on how to spend the money, which I'll show you in a minute, and second, put in place carbon pricing at the level consistent with what the UN calls common but differentiated responsibility, which is that the carbon taxes are lower for poorer countries. So we have an example here with 10, 30, and 50. That has an impact, that just this carbon taxes has an immediate impact in terms of reducing emission and therefore saving lives. And of course, because implicitly it's a tax on the carbon in the EU or in the OECD that also reduces emissions as well. The last thing I want to say is that if such a deal would be signed, one of the key questions, which has been really a roadblock again in many of the COP negotiations, is how should the money be spent? Many people in rich countries are very worried about sending a lot of money to governments in poor countries, saying, how will it be spent? Will there be corruption? Will Indian focus on trying to send people to Mars or something like that, which may be exciting but less good to protect people? So what we're proposing is 3 simple principles. Be useful to the most affected, respect autonomy of the decision makers, both at the level of the country and at the level of the individuals, and then contribute to adaptation to climate change. And that led us to this, what we call the F.A.I.R proposal, in honor of Fehr, Ernst Fehr, foreseeable, automatic, immediate, and regular. F.A.I.R has 3 pillars. 75% of the money goes directly to people in the form of income transfer. In the poorest country, you could give a universal compensation income of $3 a day on a person, basically eradicating poverty, extreme poverty. In countries that are richer, you don't have enough to do that, but because the effects are less. But what you can do instead is provide automatic insurance by sending transfer in periods where it's very hot. That would be the first pillar. This, which in Brazil has gotten the name of Pix do Clima. So Pix is the transfer, the way that people pay themselves with their phone. So it's this universal income going straight to people. Countries are very organized to do that. There is very low overhead. We have plenty of research, literally hundreds of studies, showing that people use the money well, and in fact use the money in a way that helps them protect themselves against back shock, including heat shocks. So 75% of the money would be this Pix do Clima. 20% would go straight to community in a proportion to how much the community are expected to experience in damages, which would allow them to undertake protective investments, such that, if it's a community that gets flooded frequently, they could build a levee. If it's a community that's super hot, they could have cooling center for their old people or anything else they choose. Importantly, again, this would just be a block grant because that would allow all of the overhead and the slowness and the difficulty of spending the money that is associated with climate grants in many of the poor countries. And the third pillar would be reinsurance for governments. When there is a real climate disaster, like a flood or something like that, it's usually the government that nobody's insured, so the government steps in and go and try and help people. But the government themselves are not insured, and therefore they need to go with their begging bowls and try to figure out, how they can collect their money. It takes them time, and it really weighs in on the public finance. So this could be for you could have a fund, for example, you could pay Swiss Re or whoever, whichever nice Swiss insurance company to do it, or there could be a fund that is administered by the fund itself. So one question, just to conclude, how would you fund this? One possibility to fund this is to inject a little bit of fairness in the international taxation system. Brazil, during their presidence of the G20, proposed a tax on billionaire, which would raise about $300 billion a year. And the OECD already has a minimum tax on corporation, which, if we improved it a little bit, could raise another $200 billion a year. So that would get you a fair amount, a part of the way. Why would this work? And this will be my last words. Why would anybody agree to be part of my little bargain? Well, why would a rich country agree to do it? The first reason is that because that's the right thing to do. I mean, at the end of the day, in a lot of our own lives, we agree to the principle of polluter pays. For example, if you have a mine, and you're allowed to do damage as long as you clean up. So why wouldn't we apply this principle to climate? And in fact, the International Court of Justice, about a year ago, explicitly enshrined the principle that countries are responsible for climate damages. So maybe that's kind of the boring human answer, that it's because the right thing to do. But hey, we are economists, so we think that's not the only reason. The other reason, and this is a photo of Switzerland, is that people are really upset when something like that happens and when you have to move an entire village because the glacier was melted on it. The public opinion about climate change is really that we should do something about it. And in fact, we did a survey. 83% of people in the OECD believe climate change is happening, and 72% that their country should do something about it. And the question is what? And my point is that this is the most effective thing you can do, because the real problem is not in your country. It's in India, in Angola, in the DRC that are going to be the biggest contributor to climate change if we don't change that now. Now, why would they agree to do it? Well, because there is a lot of money in it for them. And in addition, the carbon pricing receipts would stay with them, so which is actually desirable. Outside the OECD, 93% of people think that climate change is happening, and 84% that their country should do something about it. So it is also something that would be popular. So what do people think about the proposal? We asked them. We did a survey all over the world. 77% of people in our respondents are favorable to the proposal, including 85% in LMIC. In general, the younger people are more excited about it. And interestingly, the idea that there should be this tit for tat is also quite popular, even outside the OECD. So let me finish here. This is what we hope I delivered on, starting with a pessimistic fact and concluding on a more optimistic path. What we are proposing is not just, it's based on research, but it's not just research. It's something that we really hope that can make progress in international climate negotiation. It's a deal that can help reduce extreme poverty, protect people against climate change, and reduce emission and change, avoid the most disruptive effect of climate change. Thank you very much.